Mr. President, I rise today in strong support of this conference report for robust sanctions against Iran. I was proud to serve with, among other of my colleagues, Senator Dodd on the conference committee, and I want to recognize the hard work he has done to create a strong sanctions bill. These sanctions, I believe, will deter the threat Iran poses to U.S. national security because of its suspected nuclear weapons program, a country that has huge oil reserves, clearly doesn't need nuclear power for nuclear energy, and therefore, between its stated goals and its actions, creates, I believe, a threat to the national security of the United States. I've been eager for today's vote, and during the process of the conference committee, I've advocated for the strongest sanctions possible. I believe deeply that we must apply maximum pressure to the Iranian regime, that it is a growing threat to the region, the world, and a threat to its own people. In my view, tightening the screws on the Iranian regime genuinely advances the cause of stability and peace in the Middle East, as well as our own national security. These sanctions are an essential means to that end. Now, I've seen what the United Nations has done, and glad we got some multilateral response, but in my view, they're not strong enough. And that's why I think it's essential that we continue to lead many of our allies who will be more robust in their actions if we take this legislation and pass it today. In my view, it's essential that we freeze the assets of Iranian officials who have supported terrorism. And with this legislation, we will do that. That we impose sanctions against companies that engage in oil-related business with the Iranian regime. And with this legislation, we will do that. That we monitor Iran's usage of energy-related resources other than refined petroleum, especially ethanol, to ensure Iran is not allowed to replace its current petroleum needs with ethanol, which would in essence severely undercut the intent behind these sanctions. So I'm glad that we have pushed for language that will follow that. We need the ban on trade with Iran to be strong, to be significant, and to be airtight. We need to press the Iranian government to respect its citizens' human rights and freedoms, to identify Iranian officials responsible for violating those rights, and impose financial penalties and travel restrictions on these human rights abusers. We need to prohibit the U.S. government from contracting with those companies that export communication jamming or monitoring technology to Iran. We simply cannot allow the regime to restrict communications between Iranians and between Iran and the outside world, as happened during the post-election protests. We clearly see that there is a desire among the average Iranians to be able to change the nature of their lives. We saw that those willing to risk their freedom, willing to risk their life, and we cannot have the U.S. government contracting with those companies that export communication jamming or monitoring technology to Iran that in essence allows the regime to be able to do exactly that. We need to ban trade with Iran with exceptions for the export of food, medicines, humanitarian aid, the exchange of informational materials. And something that I included in the Senate bill before it went to conference, and I'm glad to see is largely still in the legislation we will vote on today, we needed targeted sanctions against the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, its supporters and affiliates, and any foreign governments that provide the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps with support. I'm pleased to see that this conference report will ban U.S. banks from engaging in financial transactions with foreign banks that do business with the Revolutionary Guard or facilitating Iran's illicit nuclear program. The Revolutionary Guard is now spread like a cancer throughout Iranian society, and it is involved in almost everything in Iran. And we need to specifically target the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and this legislation does that. So, Mr. President, the robust sanctions against the Iranian regime that I will vote for today and that I helped fashion are a positive and necessary step to increase pressure on Iran so the regime fully understands that the world will not only not tolerate its deceit and deception any longer, but it cannot tolerate its march to nuclear power and ultimately nuclear weapons. I'll vote for these sanctions because they're robust, because they're in our national security interests, and in the interests of the region and the world. And I hope my colleagues on a strong bipartisan basis will join together in casting similar votes, because when we do, we send a message, one, to the administration that there is, I hope, near unanimous support for the type of sanctions we are advocating here. That strengthens the hand of the president as he deals with other countries in the world, as he deals in international forum, and it sends a very clear message to Ahmadinejad and the Iranian regime that the United States is serious about stopping its march to nuclear weaponry. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.